Good morning, YouTube. JT Serenity Farms prepping here. Oh, it's Thursday, last day of December, and we have an emergency update. I hate to use that, but it is an emergency with New York State and the tyrannical murdering despot of a governor. They are attempting to push through Assembly Bill A416. It is about the forcible detainment of anyone deemed a public health threat because they've refused to get the vaccination. It's not too long a bill, so I'm going to tape it while I read it to you and then add my input. Okay, Patriots, so there's the website should you choose to go read this for yourself. Assembly Bill A416 relates to the removal of cases, contacts, and carriers of communicable diseases who are potentially dangerous to the public health. Okay, the bill is been introduced and it's in. So, A416 active. It's under the public health law, which they are changing with this bill. That's exactly what it is. Once again, there is the excuse they're using. There it is, State of New York, 416, in Assembly, pre-filed, January 6, 2021. You think that's a coincidence? Introduced by Emma V. Perry. Read once and referred to the Committee on Health. Do you think they read it once? This is an act to amend the public health law in relation to the removal of cases, contacts, and carriers of communicable diseases who are potentially dangerous to the public health. The people of the state of New York, my ass, represented in Senate and Assembly, do enact as follows. Notice it doesn't say suggest. Section 1. The public health law is amended by adding a new section, 2120A, to read as follows. Removal and detention of cases, contacts, and carriers who are or may be a danger to public health. Other orders. 1. The provisions of this section shall be utilized in the event that the governor declares a state of emergency due to an epidemic of any communicable disease. Number 2. Upon determining by clear and convincing evidence that the health of others is or may be endangered by a case, contact, or carrier, or suspected case, contact, or carrier of a contagious disease that, in the opinion of the governor, after a consultation with the commissioner, may pose an imminent and significant threat to the public health, resulting in severe morbidity or high mortality. The governor or his or her delegee, including but not limited to the commissioner of the heads of local health departments, may order the removal and or detention of such a person or of a group of such persons by issuing a single order, identifying such persons either by name or by a reasonably specific description of the individuals or group being detained. Such person or group of persons shall be detained in a medical facility or other appropriate facility or premises designated by the governor or his or her delegee and complying with subdivision 5 of this section. Number 3. Let me view more. So, how you liking it so far? Pretty good, huh? So, number 3 starts out. A person or group removed or detained by order of the governor or his or her delegee pursuant to subdivision 2 of this section shall be detained for such period and in such manner as the department may direct in accordance with this section. 4. Notwithstanding any inconsistent provision of this section, A, a confirmed case or a carrier who is detained pursuant to subdivision 2 of this section shall not continue to be detained after the department determines that such person is no longer contagious. B, a suspected case or suspected carrier who is detained pursuant to subdivision 2 of this section shall not continue to be detained after the department determines with the exercise of due diligence that such person is not infected with or has not been exposed to such a disease, or if infected with or exposed to such a disease, no longer is or will become contagious. A person who is detained pursuant to subdivision 2 of this section as a contact of a confirmed case or carrier shall not continue to be detained after the department determines the person is not infected with the disease or that such contact no longer represents a potential danger to the threat of others. And bureaucrats are making that decision. So, a person, letter D, a person who is detained pursuant to subdivision 2 of this section as a contact or a suspected case shall not continue to be detained, I, after the department determines with the exercise or due diligence that suspected case was not infected with such a disease or was not contagious at the time the contact was exposed to such individual, or after the department determines that the contact no longer presents a potential danger to the health of others. See how they're covering all bases? 5. A person who is detained pursuant to subdivision 2 as is appropriate to the circumstance. A, will have his or her medical condition and needs assessed and addressed on a regular basis. B, be detained in a manner that is consistent with recognized isolation and infection control principles in order to minimize the likelihood of transmission of infection to such person and to others. 6. When a person or group is ordered to be detained pursuant to subdivision 2 of this section for a period not to exceed 3 business days, such person or member of such group shall, upon request, be afforded an opportunity to be heard. If a person or group detained pursuant to subdivision 2 of this section needs to be detained beyond 3 business days, they shall be provided with an additional commissioner's order pursuant to subdivision 2 and 8 of this section. 7. When a person or group is ordered to be detained pursuant to subdivision 2 of this section for a period exceeding 3 business days, and such person or member of such group request release, the governor or his or her delegee shall make an application for a court order authorizing such detention within 3 business days after such request, by the end of the first business day following such Saturday, Sunday, or legal holiday, which application shall include a request for an expedited hearing. After any such request for release, detention shall not continue for more than 5 business days in the absence of a court order authorizing detention, notwithstanding the foregoing provisions. In no event shall any person be detained for more than 60 days without a court order authorizing such detention. The governor or his or her delegee shall seek further court review of such detention within 90 days following the initial court order authorizing detention, and thereafter within 90 days of each subsequent court review. In any court proceeding to enforce all orders of the governor or his or her delegee for the removal or detention of a person or group issued pursuant to this subdivision, or for review of the continued detention of a person or group, the governor or his or her delegee shall prove the particularized circumstances constituting the necessity for such detention by clear and convincing evidence. 8. A copy of any detention order of the governor or his or her delegee issued pursuant to subdivision 2 of this section shall be given to each detained individual. However, if the order applies to a group or individuals and it is impractical to provide individual copies, it may be posted in a conspicuous place in the detention premises. You can read it when you go through the bread line. Any detention order the commissioner issued pursuant to subdivision 2 of this section shall set forth the purpose of the detention and the legal authority under which the order is issued, including the particular sections of this article or other law or regulation. Number 2, a description of the circumstances and or behavior of the detained person or group constituting the basis for the issuance of the order. Number 3, the less restrictive alternatives that were attempted and were unsuccessful, and or the less restrictive alternatives that were considered and rejected, and the reason such alternatives were rejected. That's called refusing a vaccination. 4, a notice advising the person or group being detained that they have a right to request release from detention and including instructions on how such requests shall be made. 5, a notice advising the person or group being detained that they have a right to be represented by legal counsel and that upon request of such person or group, access to counsel will be facilitated to the extent feasible under the circumstances. In other words, it all depends how they feel. Number 6, a notice advising the person or group being detained that they may supply the addresses and or telephone numbers of friends and or relatives to receive notifications of the person's detention, and that the department shall, at the detained person's request and to the extent feasible, provide notice to a reasonable number of people that the person is being detained. Or, AKA, give us the list of all your friends so that we can go get them also. Taking a pause. Okay, folks, on to number 9. A person who is detained in a medical facility or other appropriate facility or premises shall not conduct himself or herself in a disorderly manner and shall not leave or attempt to leave such facility or premises until he or she is discharged pursuant to this section. Number 10. Where necessary and feasible under the circumstances, language interpreters and persons skilled in communication with vision and hearing impaired individuals shall be provided. So you'll be housed with all the illegal scum as well. 11. The provisions of this section shall not apply to the issuance of orders pursuant to 1121 of the New York City Health Code. Wonder why. Maybe they're just going to put a fence around that place and keep all those people there. Number 12. It's kind of long, but gets to what's really going on here. Number 12. In addition to the removal or detention orders referred to in subdivision 2 of this section, and without affecting or limiting any other authority that the commissioner may otherwise have, the governor or his or her delegee may, in his or her discretion, issue and seek enforcement of any orders that he or she determines are necessary or appropriate to prevent dissemination or transmission of contagious disease or other illness that may pose a threat to the public health, including but not limited to orders requiring any person or persons who are not in the custody of the department to be excluded, to remain isolated or quarantined at home or at a premises of such person's choice that is acceptable to the department, and under such conditions and for such period as will prevent transmission of the contagious disease or other illness, to require the testing or medical examination of persons who may have been exposed to or infected by a contagious disease or who may have been exposed to or contaminated with dangerous amounts of radioactive materials or toxic chemicals, to require an individual who has been exposed to or infected by a contagious disease to complete an appropriate prescribed course of action, preventive medication, or vaccination, including directly observed therapy to treat the disease and follow infection control provisions for the disease, or to require an individual who has been contaminated with dangerous amounts of radioactive materials or toxic chemicals such that said individual may present a danger to others to undergo decontamination procedures deemed necessary by the department. Such persons or persons shall, upon request, be afforded an opportunity to be heard, but the provisions of subdivisions 2 through 11 of this section shall not otherwise apply. The provisions of this section shall not be construed to permit or require the forcible administration of any medication without a prior court order. This act shall take effect on the 13th day after it shall have become a law. Effective immediately, the addition, amendment, and or repeal of any rule or regulation necessary for the implementation of this act on its effective date are authorized to be made and completed on or before such date. Couple questions about that last section. Why were radiation or radioactive material and toxic chemicals thrown into that clear pandemic vaccination bill? Kind of makes one wonder, doesn't it? So that last part also, that last little two, and this act shall take effect on the 13th day after it becomes law, and that it basically will repeal any other rule or regulation that they've passed in the past or that has been on the books forever. This is giving Cuomo and his delegee the authority to disregard anything to implement this new bill. Now, you notice way back up in early, it also mentioned all local health officials and anyone who may be deemed. It also allowed for anyone to turn in anyone else that they may suspect who might have been in contact with someone who was in contact with someone who might have been in contact with someone who was in contact with someone. You see where it's all going? You need to get on the horn. Unfortunately, with 63 total representatives and only 4 or 5 being Republican, this is probably going to get passed in the middle of the night very shortly. But if everyone can look up the phone number, it'll start with 202. Unfortunately, we know who our reps are in D.C., but we've got to have an uprising for this. We cannot allow this to happen. This is his way of skirting around everybody that he knows is going to refuse the vaccinations. Because all he has to do is declare a public health emergency. And then they're going to start going out trying to detain people, and we know perfectly well where that's going to lead. All right. Like, share, subscribe, comment, notification bell. But for now, Jake T, signing off.